Hello, Story Seekers. I'm Ben.
I'm Nico, and you're listening to The Tiny Bookcase.
Our guest for this episode lives in Kansas and is an author, freelance editor, and university instructor. Their debut novel, The Secret Garden of Yanagi Inn, is a modern Gothic retelling of The Secret Garden.
They hold a PhD in creative writing from ARU in Cambridge and are obsessed with everything about Japan. We'd like to warmly welcome Dr. Amber Logan.
Hello, Amber.
Hello, thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here.
I think you might be our first doctor.
Oh, wow.
I think so.
I could be wrong. It could be slanderous against previous guests, but it's very impressive. So Nico and I are both also alumnuses of ARU.
Really? I didn't know
Yes.
that.
Yes.
Excellent. What degrees?
So I did a master's there in I think it was like 2010 to 2012 in English literature.
Ah.
And I did performing arts brackets acting.
Excellent. How very cool.
When were you there?
I was there, let's see, relatively recently. I think I was 2018 through 2021. I think I graduated in 2021.
There's a fairly strong chance that you may have met my uncle, who is one of the lecturers at Anglia Ruskin University.
Oh, really? Who's that then?
Roland Weimer. Who's an English lecturer, sort of primarily Shakespearean.
Oh, okay. Well, I was very solidly in the just straight creative writing, so I actually didn't have any literature coursework.
That's fine. I just thought it might be interesting if we had a crossover there, but
yeah.
So, when did you first realize that you were an otaku about Japan?
Well, I think I kind of blame my parents for taking me to the Japanese gardens in San Francisco's Golden Gate Park when I was a kid. There's a glorious Japanese gardens there, and we used to visit, even though it's way out in California, we would drive and we'd go to Disneyland and we'd go to San Francisco. It was like a thing that we did every 3 years or so. And I just absolutely fell in love with this. And then as I got older and anime started to be imported into the US, I kind of fell in love with anime, and then I started finding Japanese authors, and it kind of snowballed from there. And then we actually adopted my daughter from Japan in 2011 as an infant. So now we have this very good reason to continue our interest in Japan and to continue traveling to Japan. We try to go every 3 years to take, the whole family there and spend some time in Japan and trying to learn Japanese, just kind of by ourselves. We haven't done any formal training, but it's been quite the adventure. But yeah, it's kind of like a lifelong interest, which has kind of snowballed and has gotten more and more over time.
I think that's lovely. I also once tried to learn Japanese and I was woeful, so I stopped.
Me too.
Yeah.
There you go.
So Nico is a bit of a Nipponophile as well, I think. I'm not really. I've never really been that much into things like manga and anime, beyond things like, I don't know, like Studio Ghibli and Akira and things like that. It hasn't really pervaded my interest, but I know that Nico, you're fairly
it's all rooted in Nintendo for me, I think. Being a young man, I'm thinking that Shigeru Miyamoto sounds like a cool guy. I thought, I'd just go over there and be in video games forever. But no, my partner and I are, intending to go to Tokyo for our honeymoon next year, and
excellent.
She's a massive manga collector. I daren't turn around and look at the wall behind me that is absolutely chocker, but I can see the other wall of manga in front of me, so I don't need to.
Do you have a favorite manga or anything like that, Amber?
I'm less into the manga than I am into the anime and novels and films, I would say. So I'm like a huge Haruki Murakami fan, for example.
Oh, sweet, that's great.
Yeah, actually my PhD thesis was like heavily involved Haruki Murakami. Like the title of it was Men Who Lose Their Shadows, from Hans Christian Andersen to Haruki Murakami. So it was like an investigation of the similarities between a specific Hans Christian Andersen story called The Shadow, and then how Haruki Murakami uses shadows in his works. And then my PhD novel was like a retelling of Anderson's The Shadow, but with like all these heavy Murakami influences, and so that was a blast.
Where can these things?
What's that?
Where can I read all of these things, please?
Well, in theory, my thesis eventually will be in the British Library, but I have they call it, like they put up so it's not public yet to give me a chance if I want to publish the novel. And actually, my agent is reading the novel right now, so fingers crossed that will eventually come out into the world. But yeah.
Oh, well, potentially on that, it might be time to move across into the stories of our own, I think. Regular listeners do know how it goes, but for those of you joining us for the first time, there's going to be 3 stories told in this episode. All of them have been written to the same shared prompt. This week, the prompt is prosperity. Nico, you are up first, my friend. When you're ready, man.
For a start, Amber, I picked the accent before I heard yours. I'm going to apologise in advance.
Oh, oh no.
This has not happened before.
Okay.
Prosperity. Do you know what nominative determinism means? It is the belief that your name can lead you to be a certain way. A person named Shepherd might be more inclined to herd sheep. A person named Baker may be masterful with flour and yeast. It was this belief that led my mom to name me Prosperity. She thought that perhaps it would overshadow the surname Parker, one who listens, when the nominatives were being determined. It is a name not unlike hope or charity. Names associated with goodness, kindness, names given, I can't help but notice, to women. Is it not our duty to be kind and good? Should I not be a beacon of positive fortune, a promise of wealth to some unknown man, the gift of prosperity? The world had already started choking on its own vomit when I was born. Its bloated body, half buried in a cosmic bathtub of ice, the metaphorical kidneys shot into space with the trillionaires. They used the last functioning resources to set up a home on some unknown corner of Mars. Hooray for them, I guess. You shit the bed, and then you go sleep in somebody else's. My mom had been a harker before me. My dad apparently was a Tombs, not a gravedigger. She said he was some kind of long-haul transporter, so no nominative determinism for him, except that he was fucking dead to me, so that fits the mold, right? Mom said they crossed paths during one of the migrations, when the sea was coming up and everybody on the coast had to shuffle in. The whole thing was a logistical nightmare. Apparently, the scientists had been talking about it for generations, and the government did not give a shit until it was too late. A bunch of people who were paying attention got called conspiracy theorists and lefties by the public, and a bunch of actual conspiracy theorists were too busy talking about alien growth hormones and the decline of youth to notice that the fish had started to swim in their kitchens. So we'd all had to move inwards, hoping for high ground. A bunch of cities below sea level were completely abandoned, and a whole laundry list of small island countries started begging for humanitarian aid. Well, sorry kiddo, we are not humanitarians anymore. Planet's dead. It's eat or be eaten. So my mom meets that guy, and she says he was handsome, but she would say that, and they travel a few hundred miles, and she pays for the journey with a supply she knows isn't going to run out, but then that supply line gets put on hold for 8.5 months, because even then I was impatient. And Bio Dad was long gone by then, and Mom had settled in Utah. The Mormons were thrilled that they weren't getting flooded because it proved that this was truly the Promised Land, so I was delivered by some Mormon woman whom my mom never got the name of. Unless they were called Sandra Delivery, we probably do not have a hope of making the connection there. Or maybe her name was Newborn or Womb. We will never know. Mom kept expecting him to come back when I was young. Good things are coming, Prosperity. They must. To you. It is in your name, sweet child. Which, of course, was horseshit. A trucker who fucked my mom for a few weeks so he didn't die of boredom hauling the world's last scraps of caviar to a secret facility to be launched into space is hardly the prosperous future I was dreaming of. I had father figures a few times. Mom was pretty and still young. Folks always made the same joke. Oh, you and your sister. The men that came and stayed always said it too. And they fuck my mom for a while, and they enjoy her company, and then they go back to trying to scrape a life out of a dead world. When the recruiters came, I was no more than 11. The woman who came was named Imelda, which doesn't mean anything, but her surname was Thrush. I wondered if she could sing with a bird's name. Now I wonder if it burned when she pissed. She said I'd been spotted by one of their agents, and how would I like to come and meet some old guy I'd never heard of. And Mom is beside herself and sent me on my way to meet this bigwig. They made me stand in a gray room. I remember thinking it's weird how everything was gray. You'd have to paint it or pay extra to have gray everything. Nothing matched in our shack. And Thrush took my clothes away and left me a sandwich to eat. I'd never had peanut butter and jelly then. Peanut butter, yeah, I knew that, but fruit like that and all the sugar? Gee whiz, I thought I was going to burst. And then she came back with him, the old man, and he got me to stand in the middle of the room, and he asked how old I was, how tall was my mom. He asked Thrush how big some of my mom's body parts were, and he touched me. It wasn't sexual, but it wasn't not sexual. Like putting your finger in batter before you bake something. I hated it. And I lashed out, and that was it for me. They screwed my clothes in a ball and bundled me in the back of a truck with about 45 of the girls of various ages. Some dressed, some not. Everyone looking pretty miserable. And none of those girls went to space. The ones in the truck. We were the rejects, dumped back in Utah to wend our ways home. Sometimes I wonder if I just stayed quiet and lived on a fucking alien planet and had a better life, maybe I would have been prosperity. But I'd rather be miserable here than happy up there with those monsters. When I think of that old man, that is his name. Monster. Nominative determinism be damned. He gets a fucking title. He could have been called Grace Saintly for all I fucking cared. And Mom died about 6 years after that. She had taught me some things by then about how to survive as a woman. And I decided, fuck that. I was not gonna listen. Harker, not me. And I found out, not long after she died, that there was work on Mars. It was select and difficult. Because it turned out that a lot of the people who were chosen to go were infertile. Something about the planet's death, bad particles in the water, and if you had ovum, they wanted you to go. So I got tested, and my ovaries were fucking prosperous. When you know it, you should have called me fertility, Mom. So I'm gonna go. Sleep my way into space and let those rich assholes have their chance at making a baby with me. Because there's no saving this planet now. Not after everything they did to it. We did to it. Hell, I wasn't born yet and I'm willing to take responsibility. And I think they should too. Because I learned a lot from my mom about the diseases you can get from men. So I went and did some research. And you can pass things along that will ruin someone forever. No cure. You could put your blood in the food supply and make sure they all got it. We've had our time, people. Let the rats and roaches have it. We are too late for prosperity.
Oh, that was intense, man.
I love the accent.
I'm
Top
glad.
I
That's
thought that was great.
that's a big passing grade. So thank you.
I don't know if it's just me, but those accents aren't similar. Sorry, yours, that and Amber's accent. I feel
And,
like
no,
they're not.
it's just more doing an. I mean, I've
Uh,
done kind of an American accent with an American guest
uh,
before, but
Mhm.
that it was a bit more characterized. If I
yeah.
remember rightly,
But
it was kind of a
what,
New York gangstery thing.
yeah, what would you classify your accent as, Amber?
Well, I'm very Midwestern. So
Midwest.
we're kind of known for not having very strong accents as far as Americans go. I do have kind of an kind of sound, kind of a
Mm.
twang. But it's funny, actually. Have you watched Ted Lasso?
I haven't. No.
No.
Oh, okay. Well, it's a show about an American soccer coach, who goes to the UK and is coaching a team over there. And the character and the actor are actually from where I live, Overland Park, Kansas. And he makes these references that are like to elementary school down the street from me and things like that. But
Oh.
the accent that he has in it is such a strong, he sounds like he's from Texas. He has a super strong accent. It always bugs the heck out of me because I'm like, that is not what people from Kansas sound like. So if you watch Ted Lasso and you hear his voice, that is not what we sound like, just for the record. But so yeah, I kind of don't have a strong accent, I think, except for a few words probably. But I also sometimes have a weird little British twang to things because I grew up listening to way too much British music and TV, so I pronounce some things a little weird. But
Oh well, I mean, for the story for a second, like I feel like that was intense. I enjoyed the science fiction elements of it as well.
Yeah.
But I like just today I was reading about uh these latest round of accusations on Harvey Weinstein
Yeah.
from Julia Ormond, and so it felt like it had some real edge to it, in particular today. Although generally, obviously, this thing happens quite a lot, or at least one hopes that it's dying out a bit. But that really horrible scene with the line about like putting your finger in the batter before you bake something.
Yeah.
That
yeah,
gave me
oh
really strong ick. So I feel like you accurately nailed the horror of that scene.
Yeah. I think it's quite a difficult perspective to write from as a man who's not ever had any of that experience.
Yes.
And it's also it's difficult to you're walking that line between you want it to have no sexualization at all, but you don't want it to become for me at least as a male writer writing about a negative experience for a female character, you don't want to kind of turn it into a horror movie thing because this is a
mm.
thing happening to a person.
Okay. So.
And I think
Mm,
I'm glad that all it did was make you go, oh, because that is the desired effect for it to be what a horrible thing without, for lack of a better term, gilding the lily. You know what I mean?
yeah. No, I get
No,
you.
I think you pulled that off well then. I mean, it has like you said, Ben, it has really relevant issues addressed in it, but you're doing it through this vision of, no, this is a sci-fi story and we're looking into the future. And so we do get that bit of distance to it, but we recognize the
Yeah.
sense of, oh, that's what's happening. Ew, oh yeah, that is a thing. But yeah, and I love the other little elements that you threw in there. It's kind of a conversational world building style that I like, where the characters just kind of talking through things, and the casual mention of like the jelly, the hints of scarcity in this future world where you don't have to explain, well, we didn't really have a lot of fruit because the world had gone to shit, but just saying, oh my God, the jelly and the sugar, all you need is that one little line and it evokes this whole barren situation. So I love that.
It's interesting that you focused on the conversational world building style, because that's actually something that you've done multiple times in the past. I think, Nico. I think that's developing into one of the tools in your repertoire, I think.
Yeah, I think it's a thing I resonate with, that stream of consciousness type storytelling. Mostly, I think it's my improv background, where I think if I started talking as a character, I could probably make up a story. So I do find it quite easy to slip into that, and yeah, it's definitely, I think, improving with use.
And am I right in thinking that it's typically when you have female characters that you do that?
I think a lot of them have been female characters.
Just it's an interesting thing to drill down into potentially, because that's quite an interesting approach. It's like you're actually looking for understanding by getting in that stream of consciousness, isn't it?
Yeah, I think a lot of it is that possibly I need to think harder, and I want to inhabit this character so that they can be better realized. And maybe I have an easier time doing that from inside their head.
Yeah, fascinating. So I do have a note actually,
Please.
which is that I feel like "you should have called me fertility mom" was the last line. I feel like that's the end.
Oh.
I like the stuff that came after it, but I wonder whether that could be like shown rather than told before that point. So you could even like put even more weight on that line of "you should have called me fertility mom" by indicating that she was going to abuse this position that she's been asked to fulfill to fuck everyone up. That might be too harsh an edit, but it was such a good line that I was expecting you to stop talking. Like I actually almost like started giving you feedback. I don't know. Is that a wild take? Do you think, Amber, or is there anything to that?
No, I can definitely see what you're saying, because yeah, that line is kind of almost a mic drop moment in the story. But I did kind of like how it came back around and you ended, the prosperity. It kept coming up throughout. So having the word so close to the end there. Was it your final word was prosperity there, or was it just in that last? Okay, the very final word. I do really like that kind of mirroring. So, I mean, I think I wouldn't say you had to change it by any means. So, but
wonderful.
A good mic drop line is pretty good too.
I always like doing a bit of a deep dive, because especially when Nico goes first, because I'm hoping to bait him into tearing my story apart. So we'll see how that goes.
Hurt me.
Going down the nominative determinism route was really cool as well. I love the line, except he was fucking dead to me. That was great.
Yeah, I love the anger throughout the whole thing. I mean, the character just starts angry, and we're like, oh, they're just kind of, an angry teen. I'm not sure the age, but it felt like angry teen. And then you start to realize, oh, this character has lots of reasons to be angry, and it justified that kind of angry tone. And you're like, oh, now I can see where this is coming from. So I enjoyed the tone of it in that sense.
I'm glad. So when we had prosperity, because I drill booked it. This is a Ben Holroyd-Dell classic. Was to write things down, and one of the first things I wrote down was prosperity, name ?
Cool.
And when I thought about it, you read these things about do you see there were twins in the States? One of them was called valedictorian, and I can't remember what the other twin was called. But that idea of like forced parental nominative determinism, like I'm going to call you winner, and then you have to be a winner, and the idea of someone bucking against that, my mum has always said I'm going to be prosperous because my name is Prosperity, but there is no prosperity left in this world. Look at it. I really felt that when I was looking at ideas, and the nominative determinism thing really did stick, and I'm glad, because I think it works as a framing device.
I think totally. I really enjoyed it as when you're reading a short story, or in particular, it made me think of. Did you ever watch Love, Death and Robots, the Netflix anthology sci-fi series?
Not all of it, but some of it.
So the whole idea was that it had to have love, death, or robots in it in every instance of the anthology, and occasionally you would start one, and then you'd be like, oh, that's what they're doing with the prompt.
Yeah.
And I had that moment when you were using it as a name. It's like, oh, that does work. I just think it was a really interesting and novel approach to it. It's very cool. Very cool.
Well, many thankings to thee.
Right, okay.
I think the good doctor is in now.
Amber, are you ready to tell us a story?
I am.
Let's do it.
Okay. Prosperity. Considering her circumstances, the daughter of a world-weary preacher in a poverty-stricken mining town, Prosperity was a laughably bad name. I assumed it was a misguided attempt at a virtue name, names like Grace or Prudence, by folks who still thought the ground was filled with gold just ripe for the picking. Of course, I knew a thing or two about unfortunate virtue names. And it didn't help that I lived in Prosperity's old house, a ramshackle two-story that tilted when the winds came from the west. At least Prosperity and I weren't kin, though everyone accused me of it. "Oh, Charity," they'd say, "you sure Prosperity wasn't your gray auntie or something? How else would you wind up in her house?" I'd just shake my head and force a laugh. But at least no one ever suggested she was my grandma. Poor Prosperity never lived to be old enough for that. No, she died at 15, my age, and she died in the closet, having hanged herself with her preacher daddy's leather belt. Some said she was bullied because she was poor, but I always wondered whether she had been old enough to be a mama and was none too pleased about it. Of course, that closet was converted into a bathroom when the house finally got plumbing. It never bothered me much that she died in my bathroom, but the other girls liked to tease me about it, how I must like to take my clothes off in front of ghosts, that kind of thing. I didn't mind the teasing, though. At least it kept them from making fun of my shabby dresses, my greasy hair. They didn't need to know the bathroom had no hot water, and I had to heat pans of water on the stove to dump over myself in the tub. I didn't really want to invite them over. We were the only 15-year-old girls in school, but I knew we weren't friends. Never had been. For years they'd been dumping old clothes and socks on my desk at school, saying their parents had told them to give the bags to charity. I knew they only wanted to gawk at my dingy house and try out the Prosperity game. I couldn't stand the thought of the girls putting on some "yes ma'am, no ma'am" show for Mama, so I told them to come over one night when my parents would both be at the factory. Of course I wanted to shake them up a little, so before they came over I slipped some dirty nickels into the pocket of my torn jeans. And then, as soon as it was dark, I welcomed them into the fusty, too-hot entryway of my house and led them straight up the old wood stairs to the bathroom. It had to be dark for the game to work. All you needed was a dark bathroom, a candle, and a mirror. Even my house, Prosperity's house, had those. I've heard folks in other parts call the game Bloody Mary, but in Leadville, we keep things local. As we climbed the creaking steps up to the bathroom, I actually smiled, a bit of pride slipping through. It felt kind of good to live in the house of a local celebrity. We squeezed into the musty bathroom, elbows bumping, backs to walls, then closed the door and stood for a nervous minute, just breathing each other's air. Faith pulled out the candle and lit it with a lighter I know she stole from her twin brother, who liked to smoke cigarillos behind the sports shed at school. I watched their faces in the flickering light, waiting for one of the girls to step forward and start the game, to ask Prosperity for the riches they deserved. But maybe they weren't quite as brave as they let on, because they whispered for me to "go on now, get started," and jostled me toward the mirror over the sink. I held the flickering candle in one hand and slid the other into my pocket, fingering the rusty nickels so I was ready. I figured it was dark enough the girls wouldn't see me pull them out when the time was right. I stared into the dirty mirror. My face was ghostly pale, framed by oily strands of black hair. My features shifted and blurred in the fickle light. "Prosperity, Prosperity, what have you got for me?" I whispered. Faith and Joy started giggling behind me, and I turned and hissed at them over my shoulder. "Throw some respect for the dead." They both shut up. Even I was surprised by the strength of my words. I turned back to the mirror. But it wasn't me in the mirror anymore. My mind started shouting at me all kinds of things. To blow out the candle, to turn on the light, to run away. No, it had to just be a trick of the light, just the strange face illusion Mr. Peterson told us about in class. But my heart knew what my mind wouldn't admit. It was Prosperity. And, oh God, maybe me and her were kin. Her dark hair was longer, braided back in 2 snaking braids, but yeah, her pale face kind of looked like mine, and her big eyes shined with mischief. My skin tingled. "Prosperity, Prosperity, what have you got for me?" I said in a stronger voice. And Prosperity smiled. Not at Faith, not at Joy. I don't think they could even see her. She smiled at me. She pulled her pale hand out of her pocket, though mine didn't move, and she showed me its contents. A whole handful of big, shiny gold coins. Our gazes met. She raised an eyebrow, and I nodded, smiling back at her. Charity, what are you... Joy began, her voice wavering. But then Prosperity threw the coins at the mirror. The big gold coins rained down around us like bullets hitting a shed, though some of them hit something softer. Faith and Joy screamed so loud in that tiny room, I thought my eardrums would bust. But then they managed to get the door open and fly out the bathroom, down the stairs. They didn't even bother slamming the front door behind them. I looked back in the mirror. Prosperity was gone. I smiled. Then I bent over to collect all those coins.
Oh, I love that. That was great. From the point of view of someone absolutely messing with their bullies. Loved it.
Well, thanks.
Oh, there's always, we say almost every episode, that's because it's true. There's almost always something that links the stories together, whether it's the approach taken or something in the stories themselves. So absolutely fascinating that we were just talking about the nominative determinism in Nick's story.
I was trying so hard not to say something when I was like, oh my god!
I mean, my first note is literally all in capitals. Fuck, no way!
Well, it's funny because, when I first saw the prompts and I saw Prosperity, I thought, well, that's either somebody's name or the name of a town. And then I was trying to decide if I wanted to go, this is like an old, talk about the poverty-stricken mining town that was called Prosperity, or have a character name. And I was like, no, character. I really want to dig into this character. So, that was such an interesting coincidence there.
Yeah, it massively. I mean, that aside, I loved the their parents had told them to give the clothes to charity thing. That's just you really captured what it is like to receive the sort of like the callous bullying of children. It really transported me. It was very good.
There was a line in there about saying that we were the only 15-year-old girls in school, but I knew we weren't friends. That it rang so true and with so much sadness. There were loads of little touches like that really, really sold Charity as a character for me. She was very realized, and especially looking at herself in the mirror and seeing Prosperity, and that I'm sure it was intended that these kind of parallels of knowing that this other girl killed herself at that age, and Charity probably wasn't potentially far from it with how she's being treated and where her headspace is at. So it was kind of cool to see her find a friend in a
There probably is a more complex name for it, but that, as you were just saying, that the idea of the sort of the echoes between the character eventually culminating in the two of them being the twin oppositions in the mirror. Really enjoyed the imagery of the whole thing, and I felt like it was just rife with you showing and not telling. So you were adding so much detail with so few words. The one that really stuck out for me earlier on was that she hung herself with a preacher daddy's leather belt. And for me, a belt is something that's quite, fundamentally it's something that holds your trousers up, isn't it? So it's an odd thing because it's quite an intimate thing, but obviously you often have like a belt buckle or something showy to sort of indicate, especially in sort of more sort of masculine cultures. So the idea that she hung herself with her dad's leather belt, it's got connotations that she was involved with her dad below the belt in a way. I don't know. It made me
makes me think of the whooping as well. That it wouldn't have been unusual in that time to have kids beaten with a belt.
It was definitely some kind of abuse, wasn't it? And it kicks you off as a reader or as an audience member to start imagining the worst in that situation, which is exactly what you wanted us to do, I think. So I thought it was really well done. And then I really enjoyed in Leadville, we keep things local. That sounds like it's like a tagline underneath like a welcome to Leadville. that was really well realised. You really brought
Yeah.
this town to life.
There
Thank
was
you.
a phrase when they'd just gone into the bathroom, so they were breathing each other's air,
Mm.
and I know exactly that sensation, that too many people in a small space. That's a really nice word painting. That
Thank you.
Yeah.
you get that sense like the air is slightly too warm 'cause it's just been in someone else. That
Well, that's what I love about this word length. I actually tried to keep this under 1,000. I ended up being like 1,070 or something, just because I have written a lot of flash fiction, so under 1K in the past. And I do love it because it forces you to condense like an entire description of a room to a single line. And you're like, okay, how can I say that in one line without being super explainy? Just give me that one detail that says so many sentences behind it. So that's what I love about this specific length of work.
It worked really well, and I think you were extremely efficient with your use of that amount of words to tell a much larger story, and just evoke so many different feelings. Including sort of compassion, empathy, and also fear. Um, it's quite interesting to be from the point of view of the person doing the prank, isn't it? As well,
Mm.
difficult to ride that line because you want to maintain suspense, but also they're up to something because you're inside their head.
Mm-hmm.
So I thought you managed that very well. The other thing that I wrote down was cigarillos because at least for me, from like an English background, that was very evocative of the kind of smokes that people could get as a
Mm.
youngster. You would get like bad cigars or something because they were oddly easier to buy when you were a child rather than actual
Yeah.
cigarettes that people were sort of like it was more clamped down on anyway. Um, so I remember somebody bringing a cigar to school and having no idea how nobody had any idea how to smoke it, and a bunch of kids going green behind the bike shed exactly as you described. So it was very evocative for me.
Great.
imagine a bunch of northern children giving it the full. Yeah, I see. With a
Yeah, sort of
cigar, so.
passing an awful thin cigar around, fully inhaling everything. So it's horrid.
Baby Groucho Marx is the lot of you.
Oh, thank you for that story. Really enjoyed it.
Yes. Right.
Absolutely.
Ben, the pendulum doth swing, and now it is above your head.
It does. Right, I shall jump straight in. Prosperity. Gog should have been looking down the canyon for Nightlander threats, but instead he watched the giant's skull out of the corner of his eye. He saw they were finally beginning to mine the precious ores from that last section of untouched bone, and from his vantage point, his family looked like rapacious termites scurrying over the gargantuan cranium. The voice inside his head spoke. Don't you wonder where they will live when it is gone? Gog ignored it, as he always did. He knew he was already different enough without being known for his madness. He focused on the task at hand, and, by the green light of the moon, he snuck a glance at his surprise. Carts loaded with barrels of wine were stashed, half concealed in the shadow of the skull. Gog, unable to control himself, grinned. Once a year, his family would all leave their homes in the giant's skull and come up to his mountain range. His mother's last wish was that they would celebrate the day of his birth rather than abhor it, and Gog always loved that party. It often went on deep into the night, and his fondest memories were of dancing with them all when he was an infant. That was before they knew you were different, not one of them. As the years went by, and he doubled in size between each celebration, it had grown impossible for him to participate safely. Despite the increasing distance from which he knew he must watch it, that time of year remained special for him, and his excitement flared at the sight of the wine. It was lonely to be different, companionless but for the voice in his head, yet that day would be different. It had been several years since he had been permitted to stand, for fear that his trampling steps might cause earthquakes that would bring the canyon down upon his family's home. Instead, he had lain so that he could both protect the pass and still feel a small measure of connection to his family. The sound of the quitting time bells heralded the carts being driven up the steep, switchback path to where Gog laid his head. They fear you, and their kind knows only one way to remove fear. His eyes followed the cart's ascension greedily, and he felt filled with anticipation as droves of his cousins began climbing up to begin the evening's revels. Amongst them was the head of the family, Gog's grandfather. The old man lumbered his impressive bulk to stand before them all, with his back to Gog's eye, and then mischievously announced, "I don't think I shall tell it this year. I am old and grown weary of the past." The assembled family groaned in unison. "Tell it again!" Gog boomed, as quietly as he could, prompting his family to cheer in agreement. He smiled at the warmth he felt to be one of them. "Pitiful boy, you should kill them all." Gog gritted his teeth against the voice, refusing to let it ruin his big night. Very well, his grandfather acquiesced. "It began after the nightfall came, when monsters sprang from the ground to despoil the world. Mind readers, skin changers, blood drinkers. All of them terrorized the peace of the Daylands until our ancestors fought back. Some few, braver than the rest, launched campaigns into the dark side of the world, and their great battles were fought against the Nightlanders. Then we discovered the worst of them, the Giant, and it was by far our mightiest enemy. Though the Giant was only one of his kind, he destroyed legions of our soldiers, and all seemed lost until Corenius, mighty founder of our family, swore an oath to slay it." The gathered family shrieked and roared with adulation at the name of their forebear, and many beat their drums or shook their cymbals to create a raucous cheer. Gog's grandfather held his hands out, signalling for silence, and quelled their cheers before continuing. "Corenius led his sons to where the Giant lay his head at night, and there they quietly approached, treading through the thousands of skeletons left by the Giant's appetite for human flesh. Using its hair for ropes, they scaled the Giant's beard and crept over his face to reach his ear. Working silently, they lowered a keg of black powder into the waxy depths. With it too went Corenius, for he would allow no other to light the fuse. He alighted in that darkness and carefully primed the barrel, all the while making no sudden movements upon the drum within the Giant's head. He lit the fuse, cut the rope, and was pulled to safety as the Giant began to stir the hissing inside his skull. Corenius took one step, 2, 3, running across the Giant's twitching cheek. Then, kaboom! Gog's family beat their drums once at his grandfather's shout. The Giant was slain! A havoc of noise greeted those words as his family shouted insults at their long-defeated foe. Gog remained silent, waiting for his favourite part of the story. His grandfather continued, shouting over all of them so his words could still be heard. In my lifetime, centuries of battle ended when the king of the Nightlanders, the skin-changer warlord known as Gast, disappeared, and their factions began to crumble into disarray. It was at that time of joy that you, Gog, were born to my beloved Feirin, and as our mighty guardian, you have ushered in an unprecedented time of peace in the Nightlands. After tonight, we will once again be prosperous, and will soon remind everyone in the Daylands of our forgotten honor. So I say, raise your cups to my grandson, Gog, on his 20th birthday. To Gog! His family chorused, and he blushed deeply at their attention as they drained their cups. Do not drink the wine. Gog carefully picked up one of the carts and tipped the open barrels of wine into his mouth. He felt the sweetness of it be quickly smothered by his saliva, but their fusing created a tart buzz which enveloped his tongue and left a lingering aftertaste of blackberries. They brought him another cart, and another after that. Gog began to feel grateful he was prone, as dizziness wobbled the corners of his perception. He scrunched his eyes and resisted the urge to shake his head, fearing the panic it would cause. Slowly, lulled by the happy revelry, sleep swaddled him. "Wake, boy, you are being murdered!" Gog opened his eyes, bleary, enormous eyes. His confusion was quickly replaced by fear as he felt the sensation of things scrambling over his face. Without a thought, he slapped at his cheek, which exploded. A plume of smoke erupted from between his fingers, and a sharp burning sensation caused him to rear up. He stared at his hand, where a dozen of his kin were smeared over the fleshy pads of his fingers. The bodies were unrecognizable, but he saw the stain of black powder, which had painted a circle on his palm. Gog stood, freeing himself from the rocky peaks he had lain amongst, and bellowed out the pain he felt at his core. The lies, the manipulations, the fear-mongering. The emotional chains that had held him in place snapped all at once. His limbs felt painfully long as he stretched out, and a burning sensation gouged troughs of fire through his atrophied muscles. Far below him, the giant's skull was a hive of activity as the lying termites fled for their lives. He stamped on it once, as hard as he could. The compromised bones exploded under his weight. The rumble of it shook the world around him, and that quake caused the walls of the canyon to collapse in with a thunderous crash. As he drew himself up to his full height for the first time, clouds splashed across his face, and, waving them away, Gog realized he could see the edge of the Daylands. A hard dividing light of white split the faraway land like a second horizon. The voice rang in his head, clearer than ever before. "Now, my son, we shall conquer the Daylands together." Gog, his mind empty of anything but anguish, loped towards that distant line of sunlight.
I love a giant, man. I love stories with giants in. I'm a very simple creature. I really enjoyed that.
Yeah, I did too. It had such a fairy tale feel to it. You know, it's like here's the origin story of a giant who he started out so innocent and sweet, and I was like, oh, this is not going to go well for him. But no, I loved how when he finally stands up and he's like, oh, he has a switch in his mind. He's like, okay, they look like termites, and now they like are termites to me. It's like as soon as he's not seeing them up close, suddenly their humanity is so distant from him that he doesn't mind stomping on them now. I thought that was a really profound moment of, I don't know, out of sight, out of mind almost.
Yeah, I can see that. I think my feeling in writing that bit is that everyone's had someone lie to them at some point, I think, in order to, sway them, control them, whatever. But that horrible feeling when you realise that you've been lied to, it can really fuck you up. And he's lost at that point. So when he stands up and, as you say, he does start viewing them as insects, it comes from a place of pain. It's a thing. I don't often do more like fairy story type things, but I enjoyed this one. I enjoyed writing it. It was a lot of fun.
I'll say your voices were great in that. Absolutely top tier characterization and voices. A particular shout out to the brief bit of dialogue as Gog for telling again, because that voice was absolute gold star, 10 out of 10. Loved it.
And I love the grandfather's, it's not really a speech, but the ritual telling of the story. It's such a good way of putting backstory, without just being like a long time ago. It's like, no, have somebody say it and have people encouraging that person to say it. Like, yeah, Grandpa, we want to hear the story again. It adds so much to, trying to input all this backstory without it feeling like just an info dump. So I thought that was nicely done.
I'm glad. I was very nervous that it would appear like an info dump, because in the sort of mechanics of the story, it's supposed to function that it's sort of like lies that they've told themselves about their past, and also built in there is like what they're about to do and why they're about to do it. Yeah, it's the whole Tiny Bookcase podcast comes from this perspective of Nico and I love telling stories to each other. So occasionally, whenever I get to tell a story within a story, I really enjoy doing it. But I wouldn't do it all the time. But I do quite deploying that tool at various times.
I did write down "Don't drink the wine" as a Ben classic. That is a Ben line. You know something's about to go down if Ben says that. It's not the first time, and I tell you, it will not be the last. But there's really
you made me sound like a poisoner to Amber. Like what's happening?
I'm just saying, you've been game master in a lot of role plays for me, and I have learned to fear that bit of dialogue. And not to give too big a glimpse behind the curtain, you said it to me during a role play less than a week ago, and I'm still afraid because of what happened in that. So...
Well, I mean, I did go to a wine tasting last night as well, which might have coloured me a bit.
There's actually a really good line at the beginning, which gave kind of so now we would actually take the time to look for things like neurodivergency in kids, but when we were younger, you had weird kids. And the line, he knew he was different enough without being known for his madness, gave me that real, like, kid in school who knows he's different to everyone else in a way that they haven't caught on to yet. And it's such a good way to make that character empathetic to the point that even when he gets up and he stamps on them, you're like, good, I can't believe that they tried to kill him. It's a good tool. It's a very good tool.
Yeah, and I liked how there's this kind of slow realization of what he was. And like when you started out with mentioning, they live the giant skull, blah, blah, blah. I didn't take that literally at first. I think, oh, there's a big, side of a mountain and it looks like a skull and that's why they named it that, whatever. I'm like, oh, wait, this is an actual giant skull. And then that, flips a different lens in front of me when I'm viewing everything. So there were a couple moments in the story where I felt like that happened. And then it's like, oh, and then he doubled in size. I'm like, oh, so he's going to be real big. Okay. It's like this slow unveiling of what things are actually looking like and how I should be interpreting. I should be interpreting things literally, not metaphorically when I was, thinking metaphorical in the beginning. So I enjoyed that.
Thank you. Yeah, that's very nice.
There's something kind of like disconcerting about the way you described him, like wafting the clouds away from his face when he stood up, because there's some a thing that we sort of talk about as they're kind of majestic and they have great beauty, and if you've been up in a plane and you see them from the other side, and it's kind of overwhelming when you see them, but for him he's just like, ugh, because it's all up in his grill. That was really kind of, oh yeah, this motherfucker's big and not very smart, and that's a really dangerous combination.
I was sort of imagining what it must be like to be just incredibly tall in a room that has a ceiling fan, and just know that you need to be aware of it. You know what I mean? Like it's a different kind of threat or problem when you're that big, I think. Yeah, no, I had a lot of fun with it. I like giants.
Giants are cool.
Giants are cool. And I like this idea of his of somebody like actually just, it's not a voice in his head, it's just somebody in his ear, like actually living in his ear.
Yeah.
But I mean, any notes at all? Is there anything that needs to be changed or shifted around, or any problems with it?
So the voice in his head was a literal voice. That's a piece I don't think I picked up on that.
I don't think.
Hey, all right, well that's okay. That's a
was
good note.
I've already forgotten his name. Sorry, the like the Night Prince or whatever he was.
Yeah. That's
the Night Man.
Mm-hmm. The Night Man cometh. Yeah.
Oh.
Yes.
So he'd secreted himself upon the canal.
Yeah, I got a note from an editor not very long ago that I was overtelling things, and I may have gone too far the other way there.
Okay, because I think that as I was listening to it, I was thinking it was more. Well, first I thought, okay, he he has a voice in his head. And then I was like, oh, wait, is this like kind of an ancestral knowledge kind of thing going on? Or so I think it's right now, it feels like it's open to interpretation. But if you want it to be, again, a literal, there is somebody in his head, yeah, you might need to hit us over the head with that a little bit more.
Sure.
I want a diary entry from the night man. You know, day 4,972, earwax for dinner again.
Yeah. Yes. Okay, that's a good note.
Yeah, because I think I'd landed on it being sort of his innate monstrousness, like an instinct he wasn't acting on, some kind of buried impulse.
That might actually be cooler.
Like maybe because he's been laying down for so long, the blood isn't getting to the right bits, and it's standing up, kind of, all his vertebrae lock into place, and it's like, right, now you're a fucking giant. Go and do giant things.
God, I cut so much from that story because it came out about 1,300 in the end, but I must have cut about 2,000 words out of that story. Because
wow,
it was because I was just describing things that were just backstory. And there was a whole section about him. Like whenever he drinks anything, there's like a new waterfall in the valley because he like pisses down from the top. I got really into this idea of like a piss waterfall for a bit, and I ended up thinking, actually, I might cut this. This is a bit weird.
He was Gog, and he were dead big, and so was his willy.
Exactly. Yeah.
2K. Let's go.
But also, I live in Cambridge, and it's very flat here, and the only hills nearby are called Gogmagog. And there's various ancient stories about these potentially like mythical giants of Avalon and things like that. And then there's also stuff in the Bible about Gog and Magog.
You know,
so
I can't remember where it's from, but Bahamut, isn't it? They're being the first giant, and his spine making the mountains and all kinds of.
That sounds almost Norse. You might have to school me on that one.
I mean, I've only got a vague memory of it, but it's that I know the Warhammer version very well, which is Bayer Matt, where they were like, if we change your letter, no one can sue us. But the idea. Well, I guess
JC isn't a big litigious dude. I don't think.
But the idea being that there were these like giants beyond giants, and you know, when they would fight and they'd get killed, and when they fell, their remains would make the whole landscape. So you know, their spine would be mountains, and where their footprints had been was the lakes, and that the world was shaped not by design but kind of by accident,
by use. Oh, fascinating. Well, thank you very much for listening to that, and also the feedback. That's given me some stuff to think about that story, I think.
Yeah.
A thoroughly enjoyable trio, I think.
Yes. I feel a bit left out. I was the only one that I didn't use a name as the prosperity.
I mean, Gog does it literally translate to prosperity, doesn't it? So his name was, in fact.
Seriously?
No.
Oh, fuck. You completely had me then for a moment.
Bamboozle you.
Absolutely. You fully discombobulated me then.
Oh, I'm really sorry.
You're just dropping knowledge bombs on me, man. Completely sending me west.
If you'd accidentally done that, that would be possibly my favourite thing you've ever done.
So what's the opposite of a cold shot? I think that's what that is.
Is that like a fluke?
Yeah, that's the one. So, Amber, before we start to grill you with some questions, I think it's a good idea before we close this episode out for you to let people know where they can follow you, where they can, if there's the best place for updates, where they can buy your book, that kind of thing.
Sure. I do have a website. That's www.amberalogan.com. There is opportunity to sign up for my newsletter on the site, but I don't actually send out the newsletter too frequently. I'm also on Twitter at Amber Ann, ANN Logan, and then Instagram at Amber A Logan. So basically go to any social media and I'm either Amber Ann Logan or Logan, depending on what was available. And my debut novel was The Secret Garden of Yanagi Inn, and it's available anywhere you can basically find books. Should be in the UK as well as the US, Amazon, Waterstones, you probably have to order it because it's a small publisher, but they do distribute widely. And there's an audiobook, or the paperback is actually coming out in a couple of weeks. I don't know when this will release, but October 2023, the paperback will be coming out too. So should be widely available.
Fantastic. I really enjoyed your story, and also your comments on our stories. It felt very very professional. So I know you also offer editing service as well, don't you?
I do. Yeah, I do fiction editing, and I'm also just a creative writing instructor, so I'm very used to critiquing student work. So
excellent.
I'm glad I edited out that really horrible, serious stuff that the good doctor said, Ben.
Right. Well, join us next week for Amber's interview. For now, we'll catch you soon. Thanks for joining us for this episode of The Tiny Bookcase.
Remember to subscribe, otherwise you're going to miss out on the future fun.
Also, tell a friend. If you like this episode, link them to it.
We'd be tremendously grateful. You can follow us on Twitter at BookcaseTiny, Facebook at The Tiny Bookcase, and Instagram at BookcaseTiny for updates. Speaking of supporting the podcast, well, magic can only take one so far. The Tiny Bookcase is supported by the generosity of its patrons. Those kind souls have really kept my belly full the last year. Let's cast a spell for them, shall we? For magnificent beardery, let's cast the Chinicus folliculale spell on Gary Laird. For rich ginger tones on the scalp, let us cast the Orangi Hedondo spell for Scott Byrne. And for general fabulousness, why not the Ooh La La, How's Your Mother spell on Matthew McLaren?
How do you come up with that shit, man?